So the last time I was in Las Vegas, I played at the Aria. There was a 100 private game that I really liked. So I asked them if I could play it again this time around. They said yes. And that's what I just finished playing. It's like midnight right now. I just linked up with Rampage back here. I don't know if you guys can see him. We're gonna get some food, but first I have to tell you guys about what just happened at Aria. So like I said, the game is 100. There's all sorts of side action and 7 deuces on, etc. A lot of chips flying around, and there was no shortage of interesting hands. So let's go over some of those and I'll check in with you guys right after. All right, everybody, here we go once again. Today we are at Aria in Las Vegas, playing a 100 game that also has a 100 big blind ante, so 300 in there pre-flop every hand. A couple of other things to mention. The 7 deuce game is on. If you guys are not familiar, it just means if you win a hand with 7 deuce and show it, everyone owes you a bounty. In this case, it was $200 per player, in addition to $400 from the last guy to fold his cards, which means if you're playing at a 9-handed game, winning with 7 deuce earns you $1,800. So that's pretty cool. We're also doing this thing where if anyone wins 3 hands in a row, they're owed $500 per player. So a lot of action here in this game. I sit down with around $50,000. It didn't take me too long to add a little more, but here we go. In the first interesting hand, there's an early position open to $300, and I look down at ace-10 suited on the button. Being on the button, I think it's okay to mix between just calling or re-raising. This time I take the aggressive route. I make it 1,000 to go. Back around to him now, and he decides 1,000 is not quite enough. Bumps it up to 3,500. So right off the bat, we're in an interesting situation. He's got around $30,000 in his stack. So with position and a suited ace, I decide to call and go to a flop. Jack 6-5 with 2 diamonds is about as good as it gets without actually having anything. We've got an overcard and the nut flush draw. My opponent bets 2,000 now, and I just call. Don't imagine I'd be raising super often after all the pre-flop action. Turn card brings some help right away, and by help I mean the best kind. It's the 5 of diamonds giving us the nut flush. Well, I guess it would have been a little bit better if it didn't pair the board, but all in all, I'm not complaining. My opponent checks, now it's on me. And most of the time, I think if you have a strong hand, you should just bet. It's not rocket science. That's how you make money in poker the majority of the time. But from a technical standpoint, I think it's okay to check back flushes once in a while, because if we're always betting flushes and always checking back when we don't have flushes, then that means anytime I check back the turn, I will not have a flush on the river. Those are my thoughts as I knuckle it back and we go to a river, which is the king of hearts. My opponent checks again, and of course I won't be checking a second time. Instead, I'm going to put in a value bet. On this kind of river card, I think he could often have improved to top pair, and I wouldn't be going for thin value, so for those 2 reasons, I decide an over bet is what I'm going with. $20,000 into this 11K pot, nearly double the size of the pot, and we get snap called. So for a split second, I'm like, do we somehow lose? But my opponent yells boom and turns over 7 deuce of diamonds, thinking that he's won the 7 deuce game as well as this pot. But unfortunately for him, I've got a bigger flush. And we start out the night with this hilarious hand, 51,000 in the middle going towards us. Couldn't ask for a better start. In the next one, there's an early position open to 300, and I look down at King Jack offsuit in middle position. Unlike the previous hand, I don't think calling is an option. Mostly should be folding and occasionally re-raising. As you guys can probably guess, if it's on the vlog, I did not fold it this time. Instead, I make it 1,000. Small blind cold calls 1,000, and the early position raiser comes along as well. So 3 of us go to a flop. We do have position. It comes down ace-10-6 with 2 hearts. Checks to me, and we do have a gut shot to the nuts, but with the cold call from the small blind and the early position player calling as well, I'm not super sure I want to start bluffing into 2 opponents. Wouldn't hate a bet either, but I decide to just check it back, and we see the jack of hearts on the turn, improving us to second pair. It does put a flush out there though, but both of these guys check again. Not sure if there's value in betting, so I just check it back, and we see another jack on the river, jack of diamonds to be exact. Now the small blind leads out for $600, a pretty small bet. Next player folds, and now it's on me. Of course, we will not be folding. The question is, do we raise or do we just call? And I think you can make an argument for both. If we were to raise, it's tough to say what bluffs we have. Maybe a hand like 10-9 suited. But even then, we might have bet the flop with middle pair. I'm not super sure. I don't know. I feel like he might be betting a flush or a straight himself. Small, trying to induce a raise. And I just don't see many worse hands calling. I guess he could have an ace, but yeah, I just decide to play it safe like a total wuss and call. My opponent flips over queens. So I guess he probably wasn't calling a raise anyway, but probably should have tried regardless. In the next hand, I straddle for $200. There are 2 limpers. Both of the blinds limp as well, so 4 limpers. And I look down at ace deuce of diamonds. Almost always just checking this hand would be completely fine. It's playable, it's not super strong, and everyone and their mother has limped into this pot, so not too sure about raising. But this time I bump it up to $1,600, trying to narrow the field. Feeling myself a little bit here, catching some momentum. First limper calls and the big blind calls as well after I make it 1,600. We go to a flop of jack 7-6 with 1 diamond. First guy checks, I decide to check it. This isn't really the kind of board I want to start bluffing. We do have a diamond and an overcard going on, but I feel like these guys will easily connect with this kind of flop texture. So I check it, guy behind me checks, and we improve to a pair on the deuce of clubs turn. First guy checks and I decide to check it again. Player behind me checks, so all 3 of us still go into a river, which is the 3 of spades. Big blind checks, I check again, trying to get to showdown and maybe somehow win this pot. But we won't be going to showdown very easily as the player behind me now bets $2,200. First guy folds, now it's on me. And even though we have bottom pair, I'm very curious here because if he had a jack, he probably would have bet sooner. 5-4 now makes a straight, but similar to a jack, I imagine he would have bet sooner with a straight draw. And if he has a 7 or a 6, would he really be betting for value now after it checked all the way down? Probably not. I'd imagine a hand like 6-5 suited or 8-7 suited might just want to get to showdown. So he's not really representing a whole lot in my opinion. Sure, he could have just slow played a strong hand, maybe even top pair, and now he goes for value, but I feel like he could easily just be trying to buy this pot and steal it away. So I stick around, I toss in the call, and he says, good call, I've got king high. Sounds like good news, and it is. I turn it over, and we win this pot nearly $10,000 going our way. Now, this next hand, unfortunately, I missed filming it, but it was a big one, so I can't skip it. In this one, there's an early position open to $500. Straddle was on this hand. I look down at ace queen suited. I make it $2,000 to go. 2 players now cold call the 2,000, which is interesting. And then the guy who originally opened, he jams all in for $35K. Now it's back to me with ace queen suited, and of course just folding would be completely fine. But this particular player was visibly upset after losing a bunch of pots in the first 30 minutes, and he was also audibly upset, complaining about how tilted he was and just over it, ready to run up his stack or punt it. So I feel like he might be out of line. Now, of course, a lot of times people act like they're pissed or they try to pretend like they're action, but really they're still playing their game. So that might be the case here, but at the same time, ace queen suited is a very strong hand, and if he's going for it with a middling pair or a weaker ace, we would be in decent shape. So I make the call. Both of the players who cold called behind me fold, so that's good news. Oh, I should also mention that he might be going all in a little bit lighter since there's 2 cold callers in the field, which might seem like an extra incentive of dead money. Anyway, I make the call, and just like that, we've got nearly 70,000 in the middle. He asked to run it twice. I happily oblige. Unfortunately, we are up against ace king of hearts, so we're gonna need some help here. First board is king high, so that is not help at all. Second board, we flop a flush draw, but don't get there. So just like that, everything that was going so well is now going not so well, and we are back to around even, maybe stuck a little bit. In the next one, the 3 hands in a row bounty is active for myself, meaning I need to win 1 more hand to collect the bounty. I've got Jack 8 of hearts in the small blind. There's an early position limp. Middle position makes it 500, and I just call. I'm not a huge fan of calling in the small blind, especially against multiple opponents, but I feel like if I re-raise, no one's going to give me any credit because everyone at the table knows that I need to win this hand in order to collect that bounty. So I just call in hopes of hitting the flop somehow. Big blind calls, limper calls as well. So 4 of us going to a flop, which comes down Jack 5-4. Top pair is top pair, so I'm definitely not upset about that. But when the action checks to middle position, who is the initial raiser, and he bets 500, I'm already not in love with the situation because would he really be bluffing into 3 other opponents? Maybe he would, maybe he's not, I don't know. But I'm going to stick around, of course. I call, as does the big blind. So 3 of us only going to this turn, which is a good one. It's the 8 of diamonds. Giving us top 2 pair, it does introduce the most obvious straight draw on the flop, which is 7-6. But aside from that, not too concerned. I check it, player behind me checks, and now the guy who raised pre-flop decides to check it back. So I'm feeling pretty good about the situation at this point. However, the river might change that a bit. It's the 6 of diamonds, bringing in the backdoor flush, and of course, any 7 is now a straight. That said, I feel like it's pretty unlikely that either of these guys are going to have a 7 too often, and also a flush. I don't know, the fact that it's a backdoor flush and the pre-flop raiser checked back the turn probably doesn't have too many flush draws, although once in a while he might check back a hand like ace 4 of diamonds, ace 5 of diamonds, you know, stuff like that. Anyway, action's on me and checking would be completely fine, but given the fact that I'm incentivized to bluff with a lot of hands since the bounty is in play for myself, I think a bet here is kind of cool because these guys might get curious with a jack or a weaker 2 pair, maybe even a single pair that's weaker than a jack since, like I said, I could be trying to steal this pot in hopes of collecting that bounty. So I put in $3,200 trying to make it look a little bluffy. The player behind me folds. Now it's on the early position player who raised originally, and he decides to raise. He makes it 16,000 to go. And I'm immediately kicking myself for betting, of course. It's a tough spot now because we could have some much better hands. I could have a 7 quite easily. I could have a set once in a while, although I guess that doesn't really matter because he's representing a flush, maybe a straight, probably not even that. So set and 2 pairs, essentially the same thing for me. Not having a diamond kind of sucks. I guess he could be bluffing with ace jack with the ace of diamonds, but why would that hand even raise? He might just call in hopes of being good. So yeah, I don't know, I guess I just kind of give him credit for a 7 or most likely a flush, which, like I said, is possible. He might have checked back the turn with just a naked nut flush draw or the nut flush draw with a pair. So I just fold. And we instantly get shown the ace of diamonds and the queen of oh wait, no, that's the queen of hearts. Yep, just like that, we get absolutely wrecked. Nice play from him, playing some good defense. We lose this hand and we miss out on the bounty. But no problem, we are finding a playable hand shortly after that. Ace jack of hearts this time. This one's a lot more simple. There's an early position raise to 500. I make a 2,000 in middle position and it gets back around to him. He jams all in for 17k. Now ace jack against an all in like this is probably not the best thing ever. We're in really bad shape against bigger aces like ace king and ace queen. And of course he could have any of the overpairs like queens, kings, even aces once in a while. Not loving this spot whatsoever, but that being said, this was one of the action players in the game. This guy was here to gamble and have a good time, so I'm happy to give action back to guys like that. I toss in the money, knowing damn well we could be in terrible shape, and yeah, it's pretty bad. He's got pocket kings, so around 35,000 in the middle. He asked to run it twice, which I'm more than okay with. And we find some run good. On the first board, we flop top pair with the ace of diamonds out there. On the second board, we flop a backdoor straight draw, backdoor flush draw type thing. Turn card is the 3 of clubs, so we need a 5 or an ace, and then boom, the river is a 5. So we end up cracking kings on both runouts. I can't really remember the last time I got it in bad and won on 2 different runouts. I'll happily take it. In the next one, the straddle is on. There's an early position open to 500, middle position calls, and I look down at 7 deuce on the button. Now, you could argue all day long about how exactly to play the 7 deuce game. What's the best strategy? Should you just call pre-flop and try to steal it later on? Should you get aggro right from the jump? And I think it's just situational. Most of the time, I guess I would probably re-raise pre-flop, since playing 7 deuce post-flop is pretty tough, which I guess is the point of the game. But in this particular instance, I decided to just call on the button and try to capitalize if a good board comes out that I could potentially represent. Small blind calls as well, so 4 of us go into a flop, which comes ace 6 6. Not the worst, I guess. If anyone could have a 6, why not me, right? Action checks all the way to me, and well, if no one's got an ace and no one's got a 6, we might be able to steal this one. So I put in $600. One by one, all these guys fold. Check out how happy they sound after getting shown 7 deuce.
Oh no! The worst way to check.
It wasn't me, right? You folded after me, right?
Yeah, so we win the pot, and of course, the $1,800. Moving on to the next hand now, the double straddle is on for 400. But more importantly, I am on 3 at this point, meaning this would be my 3rd hand in a row. I won the 7 deuce one right before, and a small pot before the 7 deuce. We've got king 4 suited at this point. There's an early position limp. Again, I think raising is probably okay, but everyone here is playing some pretty solid defense, so I don't want to raise with king 4 suited and then face a re-raise. I overlimp. Button limps as well, small blind folds, and now the big blind does put in a raise. He makes it $2,800. Back to me, and of course I'm going nowhere. I make the call. We've got like, what is it, $3,500 or $4,000 or something like that to collect if we're able to win this hand. The button comes along as well, so it's 3 of us going to a flop, which is frankly just unfair. 8-5-3 all spades. Yeah, we flopped the second nuts. Unfortunately, the small blind checks it over to me. I was really hoping he'd continue betting, of course. Seems I'll have to do my own wagering. 2,500 into the middle. The button gets out of the way, but the small blind makes the call. Turn card looks pretty great. It's the ace of diamonds, which means if he was floating the flop with, say, a hand like ace king or ace queen with a spade, for example, he's now improved to top pair. He checks it again, and now I continue betting for value, trying to set up around a pot-sized shove on the river. I bet $9,000, around 2/3 the size of the pot, but unfortunately my opponent folds. However, we do turn this one over and collect that bounty, so we win the pot, and of course an additional bunch of dollars that I'm quite happy with. My opponent in this hand was Art, who is one of the hosts in this game. And I wanted to tell you guys something real quick. This man is giving away 5% of his main event winnings to anyone who approaches him during these Aria private games that he has and asks him for a patch which says table 1 on it. That's right. If you are listening or watching right now and you're near the Aria, just go bother him. Tell him, hey man, I want that 5% free roll. I believe it's a drawing of some sort. Someone's going to get 5% of this man's winnings during the main event. Go collect. Anyway, at this point, we moved tables since Alan Keating's game was starting up on table 1, which is where we are inside of the Aria poker room. Anyway, we moved tables. That's the explanation for this change of scenery. All right, back at it here. Early position opens to $300 in this hand. I'm in late position with 7-5 suited, similar to that King Jack offsuit hand from earlier. You guys probably don't remember. You're probably not even listening to me, and I don't blame you. But this hand isn't really strong enough to just call. Should mostly fold, occasionally get frisky. This time we're getting frisky. I make it 1,000. He makes the call, and we go heads up to a flop of King 9-6 with 1 club. So we've got a gutter and a backdoor flush draw. He checks. I bet small. King high board like this, I'd probably be betting a lot of hands for a small size. 700, and he makes the call. Turn card is the 5 of diamonds, so we pair up. He checks again, and I think at this point many players would be tempted to check it back. You know, we turned a pair, got a little bit of showdown value, but I think instead it's a really good card to continue bluffing on. We have removal to 7-8, which would now be the nuts. We also have removal to 2 pair, like 6-5 suited. And most of the time, this 5 is not going to be any good. So a younger me might have checked this one back, but this time I bet $4,000, a little over the pot. Planning to bluff certain river cards when it comes down to it, but it won't this time at least. He lets it go, and we keep things moving to this next one where once again we are about to win our 3rd hand in a row. Let's see if we can do it a second time, collect this bounty. There's an early position limp, and I raise to 1,000 with Jack 9 of spades. Guess who's on my left at this point? Freddie Deeb. Some of you guys might not know who that is, but this guy is a poker legend. He's been around a long time. He's in the game now. He calls on my left. The limper calls as well. So 3 of us go to a flop of 8-8-6 with 1 spade. So we've got a backdoor flush draw, backdoor straight draw, and of course the 2 overcards. However, this isn't really the kind of board where I would be betting super often. Might even check some over pairs once in a while. So I decide to check it after the limper checks it to me. Not giving up by any means, but just trying to play somewhat balanced, if you will. Freddie Deeb now bets $1,300. The limper folds, and I make the call. Turn card is the 7 of diamonds. Interesting card. We now turn the open-ended straight draw. I check it again, and now he bets $3,500 with around 14,000 remaining, I believe. And we've got an interesting situation. I don't really want to call with Jack high out of position. What if he's just got a 7 or a hand like pocket 5s and checks back on the river? That wouldn't be a great result. So I think the play here is to just rip it all in there or let it go, which I think would be okay. But not only can we win this pot if we successfully bluff Mr. Deeb, but also we've got that bounty to go after. So I jam it all in there, the check raise all in. Worth noting, I would also be playing over pairs this way quite often, like 9s, pocket jacks, all the other available over pairs. And I'm happy to see we don't get snap called. So long as that's not the result, I'm okay with whatever happens. We also have outs, of course, if he does call. But after around a minute, Freddie elects to let it go. That's good news. I turn it over, we win the pot, and we win the bounty for a second time. Tonight is going quite well. Let's see if we can keep it going with Jack 10 suited this time. The straddle is on, I open to 600. Freddie once again calls on my left, as does the big blind. So 3 of us go to a flop of King Jack 3 with 1 diamond. Big blind checks, and I think you can go either way between betting small or checking here. This time I check it. Now Freddie bets $1,500, a pretty big bet. Big blind folds, I make the call. Can't go anywhere just yet with middle pair and some backdoor potential. Turn card is the 7 of diamonds, giving me the flush draw. That looks pretty cool, but what does not look cool is Freddie's $4,000 bet after I check it. That's a pretty big wager. I don't really think check raising all in makes a ton of sense in this particular instance. We have some showdown value, and also he's representing a pretty strong hand, so I just call, looking for some help on the river, but it does not come. It's the 4 of spades. I check it a third time. Now Freddie jams for around 10,000, and I quickly let it go. This is one of the worst hands I could have to call down with. We have removal to Queen 10, which is a potential bluff. We also block diamonds. That's not good. And I could just have many stronger hands myself, so I just let it go. Nice hand, Freddie. In this next one, there's an early position open to 300. The button makes it 1,000 before I look down in the small blind at pocket jacks. Tough spot already. There's a raise from the earliest position at the table under the gun, and then the button raised anyway to 1,000, so we might be up against some strong hands, but I don't want a cold call, so I think the play is to just raise it up myself. I make it 3,000. This table was playing pretty loose, so not too concerned anyway about these guys having monsters, although it is possible. Early position raiser folds. Now it's back on the button, who made it 1,000, and he does not call, he does not fold either. Instead, he raises again, $8,500. Back to me now, out of position with jacks, and what do we want to do? Already, I think a tight fold might be acceptable, if you will, but I didn't drive all the way to Las Vegas to fold pocket jacks pre-flop, so I make the call. I mean, somewhat joking. It's obviously not just that. Pocket jacks is a great hand, good playability, and like I said, this table was playing somewhat loose. Not super loose for $8,500 raises, but you get the idea. I make the call. We go heads up out of position to a good board for jacks. It's 10-9-4. So we're still beating all over cards like ace king, of course. I check it to him. He checks it back. I did not expect that check back, but I'm happy to see it. Turn card is the 5 of clubs, and now I think a small bet is okay. Checking a second time probably isn't the worst thing ever, but if I had any bluffs, I would want to start betting now. And of course, my hand needs some value / protection from overcards. So I bet 5,500. My opponent makes the call, looking for a clean river, but it's one of the worst ones. The king of spades. He could easily have ace king that floats on the turn versus my small-ish bet sizing. Of course, we lose to that hand now. And that's if he wasn't trapping with aces, kings, queens, etc. Maybe even pocket tens once in a blue moon. So I don't think there's any play here besides checking. Could block bet maybe for like 10% pot, but I don't love it in this particular situation. My opponent thinks for quite some time now before eventually checking back. At this point, I think we're likely losing to queens or something like that, but I announce jacks and he just mucks his hand. So yeah, I turn it over and we win this one. Not super sure what he had, maybe ace queen that decides not to go for it. Either way, no complaints from me. We take down this nearly 30k pot and move to this next one where things get pretty interesting. This was a weird hand. Early position player is on his 3rd hand in a row, so he's ready to collect this bounty. He opens to 400. There's one caller, and I look down at pocket nines. Weird spot already. I feel like if I were to re-raise, the early position guy might just shove, which wouldn't be great with nines. So I decide to just call. I don't know if that's the best play, but that's what I did. Action gets to the small blind, who makes it $4,000 now. He's got 17k behind. Looks like he did what I was thinking of doing. Early position player who is ready to win his 3rd hand, like I said, he gets out of the way, he just folds. So there goes that. Middle position player folds as well. Now it's back on me. This particular player in the small blind, I think, might have a few tricks up his sleeve. And what I mean by that is he might be raising light in this instance, trying to capitalize on what could be a weak initial raise from the early position guy. And of course, a couple of callers behind him doesn't look too scary. However, I've got probably the best hand I would ever have that doesn't re-raise pre-flop. Pocket nines. And I think with 17k left in his stack, we can go for something I almost never do, which is the back raise all in. If he's got a bigger pair, so be it. If he's got literally any other hand, we're not in bad shape. So I go for it. Whatever, I'm all in. He does not snap call, so that's good news. That's really all I was hoping for. But after about a minute or two, he does make the call. He asked to run it twice. I'm more than okay with it. 45,000 and change in the middle. Off to 2 runouts. I'll show you guys how it went. That's a good hand. Come on. Keep them low. Low and boring. Low and boring. Yup. So just like that, we take down this pretty big pot with pocket nines out of nowhere, sort of. Run good continues here. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we arrive at the last interesting hand of the night. We're playing stand-up here. The straddle is on for 200. There's 3 limpers, and I make it 2,000 from the big blind with ace king. Pretty damn good hand to look down at the start of a stand-up game. Everyone folds, which seems fine to me until the small blind does not fold. I could have sworn he was about to fold, but instead he comes along for the 2,000. So we go heads up in position to a flop of jack 10-4 with 2 spades. He checks. I bet 1,400, around a third of the pot size, and he makes the call. Turn card is the 5 of diamonds. He checks it again, and already we have a decision point here between checking back and either trying to improve or hoping that ace high is good, or continuing to bluff. And again, a younger me might have just checked back, but I've been trying to get a little more aggro with unconventional bluffs, if you will, after doing a little bit of study. It seems like computers play really weird to me sometimes. Unorthodox, if you will. But having no spades looks pretty good to me. We don't have removal to hands we'd want him to fold, like a flush draw. He could easily have a 10 or even a 4 that comes along on the flop. And if we had aces or kings, I think continuing to bet is a no-brainer. So gotta have some bluffs in there as well. I think a red ace-king isn't the worst candidate ever. In terms of sizing, I'm representing a pretty damn strong hand or nothing at all. So an overbet seems appropriate. Also worth noting, I would have plenty of bluffs, which is another reason for the big bet size. So I put in $10,000. After some thought, my opponent folds. So yeah, a little anticlimactic to end the vlog, but this was a nice little bluff. He later told me that he had a pair and a flush draw, I think, or maybe the nut flush draw, I can't quite remember, but it was a hand that I was more than okay getting a fold from. So yeah, that was the last interesting hand of the night. A lot of poker tonight, I know, a little bit of a longer vlog. If you guys enjoyed it, please leave a thumbs up and stay tuned for some final thoughts.
So as you guys saw, things went pretty well for me. I didn't play my best necessarily, but I still won money, which I think is actually the best possible result when you give action in a game, not try super hard, and then you still come out on top. That's a good day's work. I was in for, I think, around 100K and cashed out for nearly 50K more than that. So 50,000 on a day, not bad whatsoever. Obviously not every day is like that, and that's, I guess, the whole point of poker. But anyway, we're gonna go eat. This man is hungry and he's been complaining, kind of like a hungry little brother. So gonna go handle that. As always, thanks for watching. Thanks for the support. I'll see you guys next time.